It's fascinating how some emotions just seem to, well, come so easily to us. Anger, I mean, in all its forms, it often feels like a default setting, doesn't it? It's this really powerful, almost primal force, especially when you contrast it with, say, forgiveness or genuine love, which often feel like they require so much more conscious effort. So today, we're taking a deep dive into that incredibly complex emotion, anger. And we're not just talking about the obvious, explosive rage that first comes to mind. We're also digging into its often hidden sides, those quieter, maybe simmering states like hostility, deep-seated bitterness, persistent resentment. Our mission here is to draw from a really insightful source titled The Anatomy of Anger, Power, Healing, and Transcendence. We want to uncover what anger truly is, its many surprising causes, its profound impact on our lives and the world, and crucially powerful ways to manage and even transcend it. The goal is for you to get a real shortcut to being well-informed about this fundamental human experience, hopefully with plenty of aha moments along the way.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating about this source material is how it frames anger. It's not just a fleeting emotion, not at all. It's presented as something deeply intertwined with our personal power dynamics, our capacity for healing, and even our spiritual evolution. We're definitely going beyond the surface level reactions to try and grasp its deep, nuanced anatomy.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The source jumps right in, calling anger something profound. How exactly does it describe the fundamental nature of this emotion?
It calls anger an archetypal dynamic. Think of it almost like a kind of primordial switch inside us. When it flips, it basically signals, that's it, it's time to go to war. It's presented as this inherent forceful impulse, capable of igniting these internal wars right within our own being.
Archetypal dynamic, that really stands out. So it's not just a personal thing, but something universal, built into the human experience.
Exactly, a primal pattern.
And it's definitely not always a big, loud explosion then, right? What are some of those less obvious, maybe more insidious ways anger shows up?
Right. While it can absolutely be active rage, it also commonly expresses itself as passive resentment and bitterness, which raises a really important question for all of us, I think. Have you ever noticed yourself curmudgeoning?
Curmudgeoning.
Yeah, the source describes this as a kind of persistent habit of tweaking, criticizing, finding fault, often stemming from an inability to truly let things go. It's like a low-grade, constant irritation simmering away.
That makes perfect sense. I think we've all been there, or at least seen it.
Yeah.
But what actually kicks off this internal war? What are the common triggers the text identifies?
Well, the book outlines several key triggers. For instance, many people feel anger reacting to external events or people. Things like big global issues, societal problems, maybe perceived cruelty or selfishness in others, political events that frustrate us, or just broader injustices. Even the sheer speed the world is changing at can generate a lot of underlying anger.
Yeah, I can see how those bigger forces could trigger us. But so much of anger feels intensely personal, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It often does, and a major trigger is that profound feeling of being personally attacked or wronged. When you truly believe someone has deliberately hurt you, that feeling can often lead to this perceived right to lose your temper, like a justification for it.
And what about when things just don't go our way? That's a huge one for me personally.
Yes, that connects powerfully to the idea of contradiction to expectations. Anger can bubble up from a really strong need for things to be fair and just, or, a deep desire for a reasonable explanation for why things happen the way they do, especially when reality just deviates sharply from what we expected or felt entitled to. The source even points out that just insisting on being right can generate immense rage. Like clinging to that rightness is the anger itself.
Right. So it's clearly not just about what happens to us externally, but also so much about what's going on inside us.
Precisely. The book really highlights unresolved suffering and wounds as a significant internal factor. Clinging to past pain, truly believing one is owed something because of it. While the source states this can grant a person permission to be monsters, or at least permission to punish others, this deeply rooted issue is often linked to what the source calls the wounded child archetype.
Wounded child archetype, that's a very evocative phrase. What does the source mean by that exactly?
Well, it's not a literal child, obviously. It refers to that deep, vulnerable part of our psyche, the part that holds on to past hurts, feels wronged, maybe abandoned or misunderstood. It's almost like it's stuck in an earlier emotional state. It's about how those deeply ingrained, unhealed pains from our past keep influencing our present reactions, basically fueling our anger now.
Okay, I see.
And also feelings of disempowerment and lack of self-esteem can be really potent triggers. Feeling powerless in a situation, having genuinely low self-esteem, or even ironically fearing the empowerment of others can all ignite anger.
What other internal factors feed this fire?
Maintaining internal illusions and false narratives is another big one. When you try to force reality to fit a story you want to believe, or you deny an uncomfortable truth, anger often results from that internal friction. And finally, something surprisingly common: simple energy depletion.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. When you're completely drained physically, mentally, emotionally, your patience just runs out. It can easily lead to irritable, curmudgeonly, or just plain angry behaviors. Think about how you feel after a really long, stressful week.
That's so relatable. Okay, we've covered a lot on what anger is and where it comes from. So what does this all mean for us? If anger is so prevalent, has so many triggers, what are its real-world consequences, according to this source?
The impact is profound. It starts, the source says, with the fundamental personal hemorrhaging of power.
Hemorrhaging power.
Yeah. Holding on to anger, according to the source, literally hemorrhages your own vitality, your life force. It leaves you with insufficient juice, as it were, for conscious action, for creative pursuits, or, importantly, for true healing. It's like the slow leak depleting you.
That sounds incredibly serious. Does this energy drain affect our physical health, too?
It absolutely does. Anger is described as highly detrimental to health. It can manifest physically as headaches from what the source calls undischarged psychic free radicals.
Psychic free radicals?
Yeah.
What a fascinating term.
Isn't it? It suggests this kind of mental and emotional toxicity, like physical free radicals damage cells. These are destructive emotional energies, resentments, grudges that build up, and they corrode our inner landscape, making us rigid, unwell, less resilient, like brittleness, internal pollution, basically.
Wow.
And anger also leads to self-hatred. It can make one brittle and arthritic over time. The book even cites chronic anger at disorder as a potential cause of cancer, and it definitely contributes to psychological issues like depression, anxiety, acting as a magnet for these psychic free radicals, not just from within, but from the collective unconscious too.
In our relationships, how does anger play out there beyond just the obvious arguments?
Oh, it significantly damages relationships. Anger often leads to what the source calls passing on suffering to others.
Passing on suffering.
Yeah, essentially punishing them for our own internal pain, or engaging in that constant criticism, the curmudgeoning we talked about. The source is quite blunt. It says this makes one boring and ultimately drives people away. I mean, who wants to be around constant negativity?
True. And for our own personal growth, what's the consequence?
It leads to stagnation and self-sabotage, especially when anger is used to justify clinging to past wounds or perceived injustices. It actively prevents personal growth, prevents healing. This can lead to what the source calls an addiction to wounds.
An addiction to wounds. That's powerful. It sounds so counterproductive, but I can actually see how that might happen.
Right, where the suffering itself becomes a familiar, maybe even comfortable, albeit destructive pattern.
This raises a big question, though. Does this also extend outwards? To the collective? To society as a whole?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, yes, absolutely. The source makes a strong claim here. It says that collectively, hostility and fear are the actual fuel for wars and global conflicts. And every drop of that emotion within individuals, it suggests, contributes to this massive collective dynamic.
So it sounds like anger can really cloud our judgment or understanding of everything.
It absolutely can. Anger and that intense need to be right, they obscure truth and clarity. They prevent us from seeing situations objectively or from a higher, more impersonal perspective. We get trapped in this limited understanding. Ultimately, the source suggests choosing to remain in anger and suffering rather than actively seeking healing. Well, it's often a subconscious choice to reward myself for suffering.
Reward myself for suffering.
Yeah, perpetuating a cycle of misery for oneself and potentially for everyone around us.
Okay, that's a lot to take in. It paints a clear and frankly quite stark picture of the problem. So what practical guidance does the anatomy of anger offer? How do we manage, maybe even transcend this? How do we reclaim our power from this hemorrhage?
Well, the first crucial step, and maybe the most counterintuitive for many, is to own your rage internally.
Own it internally. not let it out.
Not necessarily let it out in the sense of projecting it. Instead of blasting others or feeling you need to express it externally to get rid of it, the Source stresses it's vital to own your rage, to take it where it belongs, which is within yourself. Recognize it's your feeling.
That feels profoundly counterintuitive for many people told to let it out. How does owning it internally lead to healing, not just bottling it up?
It's not about suppression, not denying the feeling at all. It's about acknowledging that the emotion arises within you and that you are the one experiencing it, holding it. This internal ownership gives you agency back. You stop blaming external things, which just disempowers you. Instead, you choose to process the energetic impact of the anger internally, which leads right to the next point. You need to embrace an impersonal perspective. Yeah. Viewing situations as impersonal dramas, maybe even archetypal ones, rather than intensely personal attacks, this allows for detachment. And as the Source says, it allows for maximum speed healing. If you stop taking it so personally, you stop feeding that internal war.
Okay, detachment. Makes sense.
And what's also fascinating here is the emphasis on conscious choice and responsibility. The book really stresses that maintaining anger is almost always eventually a choice. We have to make a conscious decision to choose not to be angry and take full responsibility for our reactions instead of blaming others for making us feel that way.
So it's a fundamental shift in mindset then. What specific words or beliefs should we really focus on letting go of to make that shift happen?
Relinquishing blame and entitlement is presented as absolutely essential. Those words and the beliefs behind them are described as just continuously hemorrhaging power. They trap you in these destructive, often endless cycles.
And for those really deep soul-level wounds you mentioned, the wounded child pain, that feels like it needs more than just a mindset shift.
Right. And this raises the important question, how do we heal those? The answer given is to practice radical forgiveness.
Radical forgiveness.
Yeah, it's described as a mystical act, something that transcends logic and the ego's persistent desire for vengeance, for payback. It involves really confronting the hatred, the desire for retaliation within yourself, and choosing to, as the Source puts it, crucify that desire to strike back or make someone pay. This is seen as especially vital for healing those profound soul-level wounds.
Crucify that desire. That's incredibly powerful imagery. It doesn't sound like just casually letting go. What does the Source mean by that? Is it about acknowledging that deep urge for vengeance and then actively surrendering it?
Precisely. It's definitely not presented as a gentle process. It's about acknowledging that visceral, sometimes overwhelming urge for vengeance or justice on an ego level. And crucifying that desire means consciously choosing to sacrifice that impulse, to put it aside, even when it feels like a total violation of your sense of right and wrong. You do it in favor of a deeper, more profound healing. It's a surrender of the ego's demand for payback, basically.
Okay. Are there other internal shifts we can make, maybe on a more foundational level?
Yes, a key one mentioned is to cultivate self-esteem, a healthy self-esteem. Developing a strong inner sense of worth helps prevent those feelings of insult or disempowerment that so often trigger anger in the first place. When you know your inherent worth, external slights just lose their power over you.
Makes sense. What about tools or practices, things that can help us implement these shifts day to day?
The Source points strongly to harnessing prayer and grace. Prayer is presented as a powerful tool, a way to rout the psychic free radicals and their shadow influence, whether that's personal or collective. And grace, in turn, can provide tangible assistance, almost like a divine intervention, helping shift perspective and initiate deep healing.
Interesting.
Another crucial tool is to consciously seek higher consciousness. Moving to a higher altitude, metaphorically speaking, allows for a more comprehensive, more objective understanding of situations. It helps you transcend that limited personal perspective that fuels anger. Think of looking down on a landscape from a mountaintop versus being stuck down in the valley.
So shifting focus from what's wrong to what's possible, from the wound to the healing potential.
Exactly. Focus on empowerment. Shift your focus entirely, away from anger and resentment towards actively empowering yourself and, importantly, others too. This embodies that principle. A rising tide lifts all ships. When you genuinely empower yourself, you also contribute to elevating the collective.
Okay, but what if we encounter really negative or even what feels like evil situations out there in the world? How does the Source advise we interact with that? Because just ignoring it feels wrong sometimes.
That's a key point. The Source advises non-engagement with evil. Which doesn't mean ignoring it. It means when encountering it, it's wise not to engage with it physically or directly in a way that drains your power or pulls you into its dynamic. Instead, the advice is to process its impact internally. And through that act of prayer or higher consciousness we talked about, it's about not allowing it to penetrate your inner space and generate reactive anger there, protecting your energy.
I see. And just in our daily lives, how can we be more intentional about applying all these principles?
A big one is prioritize reflection. Cultivating regular reflection, stillness, internal balance. This allows for conscious choices rather than those impulsive, power-draining reactions. It's about creating that crucial space between stimulus and response.
That pause.
Exactly, that pause. And finally, instead of just passing on one's suffering to others, which, let's face it, so often happens with anger, the Source powerfully encourages us to transform suffering. Transform it into wisdom, into constructive action. This involved consciously reframing painful experiences, looking for the phoenix in the ashes, the lesson, the growth, the new strength that can emerge even from really difficult experiences.
Wow, what an incredible journey we've taken today. Really, from understanding anger's pervasive grip to its deep impact on our well-being, our relationships, and then exploring these powerful paths to liberation. We've seen how anger, whether it's that obvious rage or the quiet resentment, is often ultimately a choice that can either relentlessly drain our power or, if we understand it and address it consciously, become a profound catalyst for healing and growth.
Yeah, and if we connect this all back to the bigger picture, it seems really clear that recognizing anger as this archetypal dynamic and then taking deep personal responsibility for it, well, that's absolutely key to reclaiming our power. And it's not just about individual healing, is it? It's also about contributing to a more conscious, maybe more harmonious collective.
Absolutely. So what does this all mean for you, our listener, as you go about your day? We invite you to maybe consider this. Think about a recent irritation or frustration you've experienced, something small maybe. Could you identify any little way you might have been curmudgeoning, perhaps? Or maybe even subtly rewarding yourself for suffering in that situation? And just ponder what might shift if you were to try, even just for a moment, taking a slightly more impersonal view of it, really owning your reaction internally rather than projecting it all outwards. Just something to think about.